I have to preface this video with a huge trigger warning. We are going to discuss narcissist and suicide threats. So please, if this is something that triggers you, click off of this video now. Narcissism and suicide threats. There are many times, many instances when a victim of narcissistic abuse has the strength, has gathered all of the power that they need to leave the relationship, which is the most dangerous point in any abusive relationship, whether there has been physical violence or not. Sometimes the last resort for a narcissist in this situation is threatening suicide after realizing that crying and begging and pleading will not work. And sometimes you will have a narcissist who keeps bringing it up over and over and over. And if they do, you may want to look into borderline personality disorder, which is very similar to narcissistic personality disorder, but with its own specific set of behaviors. And they can be comorbid, or two disorders together, or they can be confused for one another. And that is due to them sharing a lot of specific traits, but borderlines are well known for their suicide threats. Additionally, like I said, a person can have both NPD and BPD simultaneously. So people with borderline personality disorder, they have a history of intense mood swings, violent and unpredictable mood swings, and a history of self-harm and threatening self-harm. These behaviors help to relieve the deep internal disordered pain that this person feels, and even if it is only momentarily. BPD has the highest rate of suicide than any other disorder. According to studies, about 70% of those diagnosed with BPD have attempted suicide, and 8 to 10% of those diagnosed will complete a suicide. They are at a rate of 50 times higher at risk for suicide than the general population. And if you believe that your partner may have borderline personality disorder, you have to remember that it is not up to you whether they live or whether they die. And many times the threat of suicide is meant to make you feel helpless. Other times these threats come from a genuine place of feeling abandoned. In either way, you are left feeling powerless. Anytime a threat of suicide occurs, you should immediately call 911. But know that the BPD or NPD person may leave the scene or act completely normal as if nothing had ever happened when help does arrive, attempting to make it seem like you are the unstable one. However, if their talk of suicide is in fact meant to manipulate you, their knowing you will call the proper authorities may make them think twice. And if a narcissist is using this while hoovering you and you are no contact, do not reply to the message or the phone call. Immediately call emergency services. And managing these suicide threats is very difficult, even for trained counselors and professionals. The best thing that you can do is find a good therapist for yourself and not the disordered person. Learn the best way to manage the narcissist unstable behavior and consider leaving the relationship permanently if it has become overwhelming and stressful for you. So sometimes we have narcissistic threats of suicides as an emotional blackmail. While narcissists typically don't harm themselves in this way, they do risk, the risk of their following through with suicide apparently depends on where they lie in the dark triad spectrum, and the presence of other conditions like substance abuse, like I said, borderline personality disorder, seems to magnify the likelihood of them following through with actual suicide. And in contrast to those with BPD, narcissists are more likely to use the threat of suicide as a means of manipulation, and a clear indicator of whether the threat of suicide is being used to exploit you is if they consistently make the threat when you are not doing something that they want you to do. Suicide is the ultimate hostile act. If you believe that you are dealing with a narcissist, while rare, they do sometimes commit suicide. And in many cases, these acts are considered spiteful suicides, intended to traumatize the person who finds them and or didn't follow the narcissist's commands. And under these particular circumstances, such suicides aren't carried out by a tormented soul who didn't find the love and care that they needed. And on the contrary, when a narcissist commits suicide, it is correlated with a particular level of depravity and sadism, namely because the act is often directed towards those with a proneness to high level of shame and guilt. And in these cases, the narcissist act of suicide is a spiteful act of supreme vengeance, a malicious victory over the person who refused to step back into being controlled. So how should you handle yourself under these circumstances? Here are a few tips. Do not, if a narcissist threatens suicide with you, do not argue with them regarding whether or not they are serious about going through with suicide. Sometimes a manipulative person will take their own life just to prove you wrong. And they don't call their bluff or accuse them of manipulating you when this is happening, because doing so would accomplish nothing more than an increase in the conflict and the hostility. Do not give in to their threats, especially if you are no contact. It doesn't prove to them that you care at all. It only shows them that they can continue using suicide as a threat, as a means to control you. So when you do give in to these suicide threats, you will still be angry, and the other person will still threaten self-harm, and the issues will not be addressed. Plus, it is likely that the same scenario will repeat over and over and over and over. And what if the narcissist in your life uses suicide threats on a consistent basis? Perhaps they had taken too many pills at some point, or have called you at work to let you know they were going to kill themselves and forbade you from trying to send help. First, you must keep in mind that people who are truly intent on taking their own lives normally don't give clues ahead of time. And the scenarios that I have listed are often termed suicide gestures, or having no suicidal intent when injuring oneself, also called a non-suicidal self-injury. And these terms are being used less by the psychological community due to the inherent risks that lie in suicidal ideation, but they are perfect terms to describe a feigned attempt at one's taking their own life when used as a manipulative tool. So anytime this happens, you should immediately call 911, whether or not you believe that this threat is true, whether you believe they will carry it out or not. And sometimes people who intend to carry out a feigned suicide attempt can actually die by accident. So maintain your boundaries while expressing your concern if you must. Threatening suicide in order to get you to obey is the ultimate emotional abuse, plain and simple. Express your concern for their well-being, but never give in to their demands. Immediately call 911, especially if you receive a text or an email where the narcissist is threatening suicide or has sent an incriminating photo, such as holding a firearm to their head. Show these to police or to authorities, and don't be under the false impression that calling the proper authorities will make it worse. Not doing anything and caving into their demands, however, will always make things worse for you. And if you have any children, they will likely grow up with severe PTSD, putting them at risk for suicide themselves. Leave the relationship immediately if you are involved with an individual who you believe is narcissistic, and especially if they use these tactics to manipulate you. Regardless of whether or not the narcissistic individual has NPD or BPD, there is simply no way of knowing for sure if they will really act on these threats. And even people who have no history of personality disorders will sometimes commit suicide during bouts of severe depression, grief, and hopelessness after, say, the death of a loved one or the loss of a job. And while no one wants to feel responsible for the self-inflicted death of another person, it's important to understand that ultimately it is a choice that the other person makes. And if you have concerns that somebody you know may have BPD, the best that you can do is help them seek treatment. And even then, there is the risk of their stopping their treatment and their medication. So staying in the relationship with somebody like this is a gamble, especially if children are involved. And if you are staying with a manipulative partner out of fear or a sense of obligation, please take these these words that I have given you in this video into account. And if you need any help or have anything that you would like to share, please leave that down below. My name is Sara Ann Brown, and this is Narcissistic Abuse 101.